For 15 years, my life was a house, and then, in a single decision, I sold it to save my husband. But the cost wasn't just bricks and walls, it was my son's love. I used to believe happiness could be built the way you lay tiles on a clean floor, carefully, patiently, one square at a time. I believed if you showed up every day with warm food, folded laundry, and a patient smile, the universe would reward you with safety. I thought family was a contract signed in small daily deeds, not grand speeches. So I became an expert in the small deeds. I learned which cleaner left the bathroom mirror streak-free. I learned how to stretch a roast chicken into 3 meals. I learned the exact angle to crack open the bedroom window so the curtains would lift gently like a breath. I learned where the floor creaked and how to step over it when the baby slept. My husband went out into the world and brought home his paycheck. I stayed with the house and brought home everything else. Our house was 3 stories, but to me it felt like a country with borders I understood. On the ground floor, the kitchen and living room were the government and the marketplace. Things had to be orderly or everything fell apart. The second floor was a softer border where our son's laughter lived, where books stacked in leaning towers, where his shoes somehow reproduced in the hallway like rabbits. The third floor was the embassy, our bedroom, our negotiations, our uneasy truces. I polished the banister every Friday. I washed the curtains every season. I kept a little ledger in my mind of all the things I fixed without being asked. The loose knob on the drawer, the wobble under the dining chair, the way the potted fern leaned toward the sun and needed turning. Every corner smelled like my sacrifices. I don't mean bleach and lemon, though there was plenty of that. I mean the quiet scent of time offered up, of choices deferred, of wanting and then deciding I could wait. And for a while, it felt like it worked. Our son grew tall. My husband's laugh came easily. We had small worries, car tires, school fees, a cold that wouldn't quit, but nothing unmanageable. Then crypto arrived like a neon sign flashing easy money in a window that had never been ours to enter. At first, it was just a curious spark in my husband's conversations. He'd lean over the kitchen counter and show me a chart going up as if it were a rocket trail. Digital gold, he'd say, half joking, half reverent. I'd nod and turn back to the stove. Dinner burned faster than money grew. I knew which fire needed my attention. But the spark became a steady glow, and then a heat you could feel across the room. He stopped lingering after dinner. The chair at the table where he used to sit and ask our son about his day went empty. At night I'd wake and find the wash of blue light on his face, his thumb moving. Sometimes he'd mutter numbers like a gambler saying prayers. 7%, 12%, down 2, up 9. I told myself it was a phase. Men liked hobbies. This one was modern and loud, but still a hobby. He smiled when he talked about it. Who was I to be the cloud over his clear sky? The red flag stood in rows, waving. His temper thinned. His patience wore through. He took calls in the hallway with the door closed. He flinched when I walked into the room too fast, not because he was afraid of me, but because I startled him away from a screen that felt like oxygen. I chose trust. It wasn't blind. It was willful. I didn't want to be the wife who checked his phone, so I didn't. I didn't want to be the wife who questioned every late night, so I made tea and went back to bed. I didn't want to live in a house where suspicion was the soundtrack, so I turned the volume down and pretended the music had changed. The day the truth found me, it knocked like any other piece of mail. I was wiping down the counter when the doorbell rang. A man in a suit, polite but brisk, asked for my husband. "He's at work," I said. The man held up a folder with our names on it. He didn't look like trouble. He looked like paperwork. I signed for the envelope without thinking. The way you sign for a package you forgot you ordered. When I opened it at the kitchen table, the first page was a polite letter. The second was a schedule of payments. The third was a phrase that didn't fit into the language of our home. Notice of default risk. I read the paragraphs twice, 3 times. The house, our house, had been remortgaged months ago. The money had moved like water in pipes I didn't know we had. Big numbers. Due dates already behind us. Penalties calculating themselves like mold in a dark place. I waited for the paper to confess it was a prank. It didn't. When he came home that night, his face tried on 3 expressions in quick succession. Surprise, annoyance, exhaustion. He told me not to worry. He had a plan. He always had a plan. I wanted to ask if the plan was to tell me earlier, before the notices, before the penalties, before my pulse learned to stutter. But I didn't want to shout. I didn't want our son to hear words that would change the shape of his parents' voices. So I waited until bedtime and asked then. He was sorry. The market had dipped. Then it would rebound. He'd fix it. He just needed time. Debt is a tide that pretends it's patient. It licks your ankles and calls it weather. Then one morning you open the door and the street is a river and you're already wet to the knees. I did the math with a dish towel over my shoulder. The numbers didn't care if the counters were clean. They didn't care that I had cooked 400 Sunday dinners in that kitchen. They didn't care how many first day of school photos had been taken in that front hall. The payments we owed were bigger than our size. The penalties were loud enough to drown out music. The interest didn't sleep. Neither did I. I made the decision the way you make soup from a bare pantry. Step by step, with every cupboard open, with heat you didn't plan to use, with spices you hoped would disguise how little you had. Sell the house. Pay the debt. Keep the wolves outside the door, even if the door had to be a different one. I told myself this was love in its adult form. Not a vow at an altar, but a signature at a desk. Not a bouquet, but a bank check. Not a promise to always be happy, but a promise to keep the lights on. Do you know what it feels like to walk through your home and say goodbye to objects that never learned to speak your name, but somehow knew it? The spoon with the dent where soup caught and cooled, the crack in the tile by the back door where our son's first bike toppled, the faint circle on the coffee table from a party we threw in a year when laughter was easy. I touched each thing and felt it touch back. I told the rooms we did our best. I told the walls I was sorry I hadn't protected them from the flooding math outside. I told the house it was not its fault. I sold it. We signed. The keys left my hand, and with them, a version of me I will never hold again. We paid the debt. The calls stopped. The air changed, thinner but breathable. You'd think a husband would fold his wife into his arms on a night like that. You'd think he'd whisper thank you into her hair, 2 words shaped like shelter. Instead, his shoulders loosened as if a backpack had been lifted from them. A backpack I hadn't known I was carrying too. He said something about fresh starts. He looked at his phone like it had missed him, and he needed to apologize. I lay awake in our shrinking life and told myself a softer story. At least our son would not grow up with shame. At least he would not learn hunger from bills unpaid. At least. The words tasted like substitutes, like margarine instead of butter, like instant coffee instead of the good kind. Still, I drank them. I needed to. I thought saving the house meant saving us. I thought saving us meant saving my son's future. I believed in the math of sacrifice, give more, gain peace. I believed if I bled now, the wound would heal later. I was wrong. I had no idea what was coming. They say a house is just walls and a roof. But when you sell your home to save a man who's drowning, you sell pieces of yourself too. The day of the sale is burned into me like a scar. The room was plain, the kind of office where people trade things they don't love for things they can't avoid. The air smelled like paper and stale coffee, and the walls had no sympathy. They had watched 100 couples before us, all trying to stitch together lives with signatures. I sat at a table across from men in suits who looked polite, but detached, their pens ready like scalpels. To them, this was just another transaction. To me, it was an amputation. Every page they slid across the table was another incision. Sign here. Initial here. The words were sharp but practiced. My hand shook as I held the pen, not from weakness, but because my body understood what my mind tried to deny. I wasn't just signing away a building. I was signing away my anchor, my sanctuary, the place that held 15 years of my story. I kept waiting for someone to stop me. Maybe a voice in my head. Maybe a clerk who would look up and say, "Are you sure? Do you understand what this means?" But no one interrupted. The machine rolled forward, and I fed myself into its gears. When I wrote my name for the last time, the letters came out crooked, half swallowed by the trembling in my hand. It felt like betrayal to see my name there, bleeding across the paper, authorizing my own undoing. When the papers were gathered, clipped neatly, the men smiled faintly, business complete. I wanted to scream, "Do you know what you've just witnessed?" But they didn't care. To them, I was just another woman making desperate choices. To me, I was a mother bleeding out so her son wouldn't drown. Leaving the house was worse than signing it away. Packing was like digging up a grave you'd hoped would stay untouched. Each box I filled seemed to whisper a memory. My son's baby clothes, too small to keep but too precious to throw away. The dent in the wall where his ball had left its mark. The smell of the wooden stairs after I polished them on Fridays. I walked through each room like a mourner walking through pews. In the living room, I remembered birthdays with cake smeared across a small boy's cheeks. In the kitchen, the countless meals that never got applause but fed us anyway. In the bedroom, the mix of love and arguments, both of which had once seemed survivable. It was like touching a body and realizing it was already cold. I stood in the doorway one last time, hand on the frame, whispering to no one, "I'm sorry." I did everything I could. I tried to soothe myself with mantras. Debts paid. Family saved. I whispered them under my breath as I sealed boxes with tape that shrieked across cardboard. I repeated them as I handed over the keys. I muttered them at night while my son lay asleep on the thin mattress in our smaller, rented place. If I repeated them enough, maybe they would be true. Maybe I would believe that saving the house was impossible, but saving the family still was. But then there was my husband. You'd expect him to mourn with me, to grieve the house the way you grieve a lost pet or a broken heirloom. You'd expect him to hold me, thank me, promise me that my sacrifice meant something. But when I looked at him, I saw something else. Relief. His shoulders lowered like a weight had slipped away. His eyes didn't look at me with guilt or gratitude. They slid past me to the glow of his phone, back to the markets that had already consumed us. He muttered something about a fresh start, as if the wreckage was just a game reset button. That moment chilled me more than the sale itself. I had sold pieces of my soul, brick by brick, to pull him out of the tide. And he didn't even feel saved. Still, I told myself I had done it for my son. At least he wouldn't grow up under a cloud of debt collectors and whispers. At least he wouldn't feel shame every time the phone rang. That fantasy was all I had left, so I clung to it. But fantasies are fragile. They can crack with the smallest touch. It happened on a quiet afternoon, the kind where nothing should go wrong. I was tidying up when I found it, just a slip of paper, folded and forgotten. At first I thought it was ordinary. Groceries, gas, maybe something small. But it wasn't. It was the receipt. A luxury purse, designer brand, more than I had ever spent on myself in 15 years. Bought in the same weeks I was counting coins to buy groceries. My hands went cold. My breath stopped. I stared at the numbers, at the brand name printed in bold, and I understood. This wasn't for me. It wasn't for us. It was for someone else. And in that instant, all my mantras died. I thought selling the house meant saving us. I thought saving us meant saving my son. But that receipt whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. My sacrifice had never been for us. It had been for him. And for her. The betrayal was waiting, patient and merciless. And I had just walked straight into it. When you sell your house to pay debts, you expect your husband to mourn with you. You don't expect him to buy his mistress a luxury purse. The receipt was small, fragile, almost weightless. Just a thin slip of paper tucked where it shouldn't have been. But the moment I unfolded it, it became heavier than bricks, heavier than the house I had sold, heavier than the years I had given away without question. The numbers printed on it blurred for a second because my eyes refused to believe what they were seeing. A brand name I knew only from magazines. A price tag that could have covered our groceries for months. And a date that lined up perfectly with the days I was begging creditors for patience. It wasn't for me. I had never owned anything that expensive in my life. Every handbag I carried was bought on discount, chosen for practicality, durability, never luxury. My husband had never once surprised me with something extravagant. No flowers just because, no jewelry, no perfumes. His gifts were always practical, if they came at all. A washing machine, a vacuum cleaner, things for the house, not for me. This purse was not mine, and that meant it belonged to someone else. I felt my chest tighten, as though invisible hands had closed around my lungs. Betrayal has a way of stealing air before it steals anything else. My son was in the other room, his laughter faint as he watched something on his phone. Life continued, unknowing, while I sat with evidence of its collapse in my hands. I thought back to the nights I had lain awake, praying for miracles. The mornings I had stretched our money until it screamed. The afternoons I'd chosen the cheapest cuts of meat, the bruised fruit, the bread one day away from expiration, all so that we could keep surviving. While I was counting coins, he was buying her purses. The image seared into my brain. Him walking into a boutique, the lights bright and golden, a saleswoman smiling at him with polished lips. He hands over a card, our card, my sacrifices wrapped in plastic, and she hands him a box, wrapped with tissue, tied with ribbon. He walks out with a smile I hadn't seen in months. And he delivers it not to me, not to the woman who sold her home to save him, but to someone else. The scene replayed again and again until I thought I would vomit. Was everything a joke? Was my 15 years of loyalty, silence, and sacrifice nothing but the setup to his punchline? Had I given away my house, my pride, my safety, just so another woman could swing a purse from her arm and laugh at the man she thought was generous? The thought hollowed me out. My stomach turned, my hands shook, but no tears came. The betrayal cut so clean that pain hadn't caught up yet. I sat there, numb, staring at proof that my life had been rewritten in invisible ink. That night, I studied him with new eyes. He came home late, humming under his breath like a man who had nothing to fear. His phone buzzed and lit up, and his eyes softened in a way they no longer did for me. He didn't notice the way I watched him. He didn't notice the paper folded tight in my fist. I saw him clearly now. The late-night calls, the sudden business trips, the empty wallet and the too-full silence. I had thought he was gambling with money, but he was gambling with me, with us. And suddenly, the puzzle pieces aligned into a picture I couldn't ignore. I remembered one particular evening, weeks earlier. I had been bent over the kitchen table, receipts and bills spread like battle plans, trying to make numbers add up that refused to obey. He had walked in, brushed my shoulder, and told me not to worry. He had kissed our son's head, laughed too easily, and slipped out again with the car keys jingling in his hand. That same night, I had made soup from scraps and whispered to myself, "Debts paid, family saved." But the receipt told me the truth. That was the night he had bought her the purse. I had been boiling bones for broth while he was boiling over with excitement to impress someone else. I felt rage, but underneath it I felt something colder. Clarity. I had thought betrayal was the deepest wound, but betrayal can also be a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw a man I didn't recognize, a marriage already ash, and a woman, me, who had been asked to sacrifice her body, her home, her dignity, only to be rewarded with lies. That was the night I made my decision. Divorce. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a scream thrown in his face. It was a quiet, steady vow whispered to myself while the rest of the world slept. No more. This ends here. I folded the receipt carefully, like evidence I might need in court. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't cruel, that I hadn't destroyed our family. He had. I tucked it away in a drawer, a secret blade waiting for the day I would need to cut free. But even as I lay awake that night, the paper hidden a few feet away, something gnawed at me. Because I thought betrayal was the worst pain. I thought losing my husband's love, or whatever counterfeit love he had left, was the deepest wound I would ever suffer. I thought the purse was the final insult, the end of my rope, the sharpest dagger in my back. But I was wrong. So very, very wrong. What came next cut deeper than any purse, any affair, any betrayal of flesh or money. Because it didn't come from my husband. It came from my son. You can survive losing money. You can survive losing a house. But when your child looks at you with hate, you wonder if you can survive at all. I thought the worst thing in my marriage was the betrayal, the purse, the lies, the quiet nights where his phone lit up and his eyes softened for someone who wasn't me. But betrayal from a husband, no matter how cruel, is still something you can brace for. Adults hurt each other all the time. What I didn't prepare for was the betrayal from my son. Not because he meant to hurt me, but because he believed the wrong story. He was 14, tall enough now that when he squared his shoulders, he could look almost level with me. His voice had dropped recently, no longer the high-pitched laughter of a boy, but the heavy tones of a teenager testing the edges of manhood. That night he stood in the center of our small rented living room, fists clenched, eyes burning, and he said the word that split me in half. "You're cruel." 2 words, sharp as knives. "You're tearing the family apart." My knees weakened. My breath caught. His words didn't sound like his own. They sounded borrowed, rehearsed, whispered into his ear by someone else. I didn't need to guess who. Cruel. That's what my son thought of me. How do you explain to a child that cruelty sometimes wears a different mask? That real cruelty doesn't always look like raised voices or slammed doors. but sometimes like a father's smile hiding secrets, like a luxury purse hidden in the trunk of a car. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I was staring at the boy I had raised, the baby I had rocked through fevers, the toddler I'd chased through playgrounds, the boy who once clung to my hand so tightly I thought he'd never let go. And now he was looking at me as though I were the villain in his story. It felt like a blade, driven straight into the center of me. Not once, but over and over, each accusation another stab. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him, to make him see. But all I could do was stand there, silently bleeding, while he carved me open with words he didn't even understand. In his eyes, his father was the tragic hero, the man who had smiled through the storm, who laughed even as we packed boxes, who told him stories about new beginnings and fresh starts. His father had painted himself as the victim of bad luck, not bad choices. And me, in his eyes, I was the executioner, the one who signed the papers, the one who ended the marriage, the one who dragged him from the only home he had ever known. I had become the villain in the script his father had written. The irony was unbearable. I had sold my house, my pride, my sanity, all to protect my son, to shield him from shame, to make sure he still had a father to look up to. And yet, in his eyes, I was the destroyer. I whispered silently, I lost my husband by choice. Losing my son was never a choice. But the universe doesn't care about whispers. My son's eyes shouted louder than any truth I could tell. His eyes, once wide with wonder, once shining when I clapped at his school play, were now narrowed, suspicious, angry. The same eyes that had searched for me in crowds, that had sparkled when I kissed his forehead, now looked at me like I was a stranger who had broken into his life and taken everything he loved. That night, after he stormed into his room and slammed the door, I sat alone in the dark. The apartment was too quiet. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of loss. I thought about going to him, knocking on his door, sitting on the edge of his bed and telling him everything. The gambling, the debts, the mortgage, the affair, the purse. I thought about laying it all bare, ripping away the veil of lies his father had spun. I imagined his face as I spoke. First confusion, then horror, then heartbreak. I imagined him realizing his hero was a fraud. I imagined him crying, not the loud sobs of childhood, but the silent kind that shake a teenager's whole body. I imagined him looking at me not with hate, but with despair. And the picture was almost worse than the one I had already lived. Because what would hurt him more? The lie that made his father a hero, or the truth that would make him a coward? It is a terrible thing to stand between justice and mercy, to know that either way, you are the one holding the knife. Justice whispered, tell him. He deserves the truth. He deserves to know who really tore this family apart. Mercy whispered, don't. He's only 14. Let him keep the illusion a little longer. Childhood is short enough. Justice snarled, if you stay silent, you let him hate you forever for something you didn't do. Mercy begged, if you speak, you take away the last thing he has, the image of a father worth loving. The voices tore at me until I could hardly breathe. I looked again at the folded receipt in the drawer by my bed. Proof of betrayal. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I wasn't cruel. Should I show it to him? Should I lay it down on the table like evidence in a trial? Force him to read the truth with his own eyes? Or should I keep it hidden? Let him believe I was the villain. Let him grow up angry at me. If only it meant he could still look at his father without breaking. Either choice cut me in two. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the sound of his breathing through the thin walls, wondering if he would ever forgive me. wondering if I would ever forgive myself. Should I tell him the truth or let him live in a lie? Would you destroy your child's image of his father just to save your own name? That question sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up. Every day I carried it, heavy, unmovable, and every night I turned it over in my mind until dawn blurred the window. I would sit at the kitchen table of our small apartment, the one too cramped to hold the ghosts of everything we had lost. The receipt lay folded in the drawer just a few feet away. I knew every crease by heart. Proof that I wasn't cruel. Proof that my marriage had been bleeding long before I pulled the plug. Proof that I wasn't the one who tore the family apart. But proof for who? For me. Or for my son? I'd look at the empty chair across from me and imagine him sitting there. 14 years old, legs sprawled, hair falling into his eyes. I'd whisper the question into the silence. What would save you? The truth or the lie? The silence never answered. So I tried to answer it myself. I made a list in my head. Justice versus mercy. Pros and cons, like I was balancing a checkbook that refused to add up. If I told him the truth, he would know it wasn't me. He would stop calling me cruel. He would see his father clearly, not as a hero crushed by bad luck, but as a man who chose to betray us. He might forgive me. He might even trust me again. But what would it cost? His hero would die in front of him. His father would shrink in his eyes until the man he adored was nothing but a fraud. And once you lose faith in the people who made you, how do you ever believe in anyone again? If I kept silent, he would keep his father, at least the version of him he could love. He could hold on to that image a little longer, keep his childhood from collapsing too soon. But then he would keep hating me. He would grow harder around the eyes, colder around the heart. He would believe I was the villain, and every hug I offered would bounce off him like stone. One day, when he was older, he might discover the truth anyway. And then the question would be different. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me hate you all those years? Either way, I burned. At night the voices came. Justice and mercy, arguing like rival lawyers in a courtroom built inside my skull. Justice said, tell him. He deserves oxygen, not poison. Lies suffocate. Give him the truth, even if it hurts. Mercy said, don't. He's a boy. He needs softness, not harshness. Protect his last piece of innocence, even if it means he hates you for now. Justice shouted, since when is mercy protecting the liar and punishing the loyal? Since when is silence a virtue? Mercy whispered, since you became a mother. Since you promised to bleed, if it meant he could smile a little longer. The argument circled until morning, leaving me hollow-eyed and trembling. I tried to picture what would happen if I spoke. I'd call him to the table. I'd unfold the receipt like a surgeon laying out instruments. My voice would be steady, but my hands would shake. I'd tell him, your father wasn't just careless with money. He was careless with us. He bought gifts for another woman while I was selling our house to keep us afloat. And I pictured his face, blank at first, then slowly crumpling. His eyes wide, then wet, then breaking. He'd whisper no once, then again, louder, like the word could reverse reality. He'd retreat into his room, shut the door, and the boy I knew would disappear into silence. I saw him losing not just his father, but the last fragile hope he had that family meant safety. And I wondered if the truth would shatter him more than the lies ever could. Then I pictured staying silent. He would grow up believing I destroyed everything. He'd slam doors, roll his eyes, speak to me like I was a stranger. He'd cling to his father's weekends with joy and endure my weekdays like punishment. He'd carry resentment like a badge. And then, one day, maybe years later, he'd discover the truth anyway. He'd find the receipt, or someone would tell him, or life would teach him what men like his father leave behind. He'd come to me with anger in his eyes and ask, "Why didn't you say anything?" And I'd have no answer except the one he might never forgive. Because I wanted you to keep a father, even if it cost me a son. Both futures were unbearable. So I searched for a third path, something gentler. Maybe I could tell him only pieces. Your father and I hurt each other. We both made mistakes. We couldn't fix it. A version of the truth scaled to what his heart could carry. Not a lie, but not the whole fire either. Maybe it would buy us time. Maybe it would build a bridge wide enough for him to cross when he was ready. But bridges built on half-truths sometimes collapse anyway. So I sat with the question night after night. I would open the drawer, touch the folded receipt, feel the sharp edge of its truth. I'd imagine laying it on the table, imagine burning it in the sink, imagine hiding it forever. None of those choices freed me. All of them cut me. I stood outside his bedroom door more than once, my hand raised to knock, my mouth ready to speak. But each time I froze. On the other side was a boy who needed a father he could still love, and a mother he could still forgive. On this side was a woman who didn't know how to give him both. So I lowered my hand. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Instead, I sat outside his door in the dark, guarding him from a truth that clawed at me, holding silence like a burning coal, letting it blister me so it wouldn't scorch him. No matter what I choose, I burn. I stand in a tiny rented room, stripped of my home, my marriage, and maybe my son. This is where 15 years of love brought me. The walls are thin here. I can hear the neighbor's television, the buzz of a street lamp outside, the coughs of strangers I will never know. This place holds no history, no memories, no smell of my sacrifices. It's just a shelter, nothing more. And yet, it is where my story continues because I had no other choice. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see the house. The banister polished until it gleamed. The curtains I sewed by hand. The kitchen that never rested. The rooms alive with the sound of birthdays, laughter, arguments, apologies. It feels like a dream I once lived in. And like all dreams, it faded the moment I woke up. But the ache doesn't come from losing the walls. It comes from the eyes of my son. Because a house you can rebuild. A marriage you can dissolve. But a child's trust, once it cracks, it doesn't fit back together the same way. I replay it in my mind as though it were a trial. My son is the judge and the jury. He sits in silence, eyes stern, waiting for me to defend myself. My husband plays the victim, shoulders slumped, sighs heavy, painting himself as the man undone by fate. And me, I am always the accused, the woman with the gavel raised against her, the one who chose to end it all. Cruel, my son said, and the verdict landed. I want to scream my defense, to hold up the receipt like evidence, to call witnesses. The sleepless nights, the empty pantry, the mortgage I never agreed to, the luxury purse I never carried. I want to shout that I sold the house to save him, not to hurt him. But courts in the heart do not run on facts. They run on belief. And right now, he believes his father. So I sit in silence, sentenced without appeal. And that's where the question returns to me again and again, sharper each time. Would you protect a lie to save your child's innocence? Or reveal the truth and risk shattering him? From the outside, the answer seems easy. People say children should know the truth. People say lies only poison. But those people don't sit outside their son's door at night, listening to him cry, wondering if one more truth will break him completely. Those people don't know what it feels like to already be hated for something you didn't do and still hesitate to clear your name because you fear what it would cost him. It is not philosophy when it's your own child. It is fire. And no matter which way you walk, you burn. I imagine it often, calling him to the table, placing the receipt in front of him, speaking every word I've swallowed for months. I see his face unraveling, his hands trembling, his world collapsing. His father falls from the pedestal in a single blow. And in that moment, my son loses not just trust in his dad, but trust in love itself. He learns too soon that promises are fragile, that even family can be counterfeit. And then I imagine the other path, silence. I keep the truth locked away. He keeps his father, shining in his eyes like a hero who stumbled but never betrayed. And I stay the villain. He grows harder toward me, distances himself inch by inch. One day, maybe years from now, he will discover the truth on his own. And when he does, he may never forgive me. Not for what his father did, but for what I chose not to say. Both paths end in fire. So what do? I choose love. Not the kind that fixes everything. Not the kind that gets celebrated or applauded. The messy, quiet kind. The kind that bleeds without showing scars. The kind that says, I will take the burn so you don't have to. Maybe one day when he is older, stronger, ready to face the storm, I will tell him. Maybe then he will look back and see that I wasn't cruel, just human. That I wasn't the executioner, but the shield. Or maybe he never will. Maybe he will carry the story his father gave him, and I will remain the villain in his heart. Maybe he will never know the truth of what I carried, what I lost, what I endured. But still I choose love, because losing my husband was survivable. Losing my home was survivable. Losing my pride was survivable. But losing my son completely? That is a wound I cannot risk cutting deeper. So here I am, in this tiny room, stripped of everything that once defined me. The walls are bare, the furniture cheap, the floor creaks when I walk across it. But in this space, I hold on to the only thing I have left, the hope that one day my son will see me for what I am, not cruel, not flawless, but a mother who burned quietly so he could keep believing in something a little longer. That hope is fragile, but it is enough to keep me standing. And now, I turn the question to you. If you were me, would you protect the lie to save your child's innocence? Or reveal the truth and risk shattering him? Tell me. Because every night I ask myself, and every morning I wake up still carrying it like a stone inside me. Maybe I am cruel, or maybe I am just a mother who has nothing left but her son.